Hey, what's up YouTube? One of the reasons why I'm making this video right now is because the Fed is actually meeting next week. I believe next Tuesday, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But they are meeting next week, and the talk and the debate in the economic circles is whether or not they're going to announce more quantitative easing or not. So, quantitative easing. That's being thrown around all over the place, but a lot of people might not know exactly what that is. So I wanted to go ahead and make this video to clear that up. Okay, so here's the deal. We all know that the Fed creates money out of thin air, and then they lend that money out to be paid back with interest. That's one of the reasons why the U.S. debt is so ridiculous, because all the money that we use, we borrow from them, and then we have to pay it back with the interest. Now, normally, to stimulate the economy, the Fed reduces the interest rate, so the banks are more inclined to borrow more money, and that would stimulate them to borrow more and lend out more and kick the economy going. The problem arises when the interest rate is at or near 0%, like it is now. In order to stimulate the economy at that point, the Fed does what's called the quantitative easing. 4 steps of quantitative easing. First, the Fed prints up more money out of thin air. And when I say the Fed, of course I'm talking about the Federal Reserve, and I'm really referring to any major central bank. Any of these guys could do this. Step number 2, the Fed buys up crappy assets from other banks. Step 3, the purchase by the Fed of these crappy assets gives a big influx of cash to the banks. And the influx of cash allows the banks, through fractional reserve banking, to multiply that and create even more money out of thin air. Probably everybody knows, but the fractional reserve banking is the concept that a bank can lend out $100 for every buck that it has, because it goes on the premise that all its customers aren't going to come in at once and try to withdraw all their money, so it can create all this fake money. It's like a casino or something. And I don't know if it's 100 to 1. I don't know what the actual stat is, but just for the example. Step 4, okay, at the same time that the Fed buys up these toxic assets, it turns around and it buys a crap load of treasury bonds. This influx of demand on the treasury bonds lowers the yields of the bonds and puts additional pressure on the banks to lend money out to small businesses and people and whatnot. In other words, the banks don't like the idea of trying to invest all the money they just borrowed from the Fed into treasury bonds, because they won't be making enough money. So again, they're more inclined to take the risk and invest it in small business. And that's the concept of how that quantitative easing stimulates the economy. Basically, by these actions that the Fed's taking, they're hoping the banksters say to themselves, cool, we got rid of all these lame-ass assets and we got a whole bunch of cash now, and we ain't going to make any kind of money with the bonds, so let's pick some good small businesses and lend some of it out and gouge them for the interest and make the money on them. So the problem with quantitative easing is that the money in circulation in an economy has to be directly related to the strength of the economy. And if you dump a crap load of money into an economy that isn't strong and can't make use of that money, you just wind up with inflation. So that's the main problem that we're facing. We can see from where we're at right now, we've already increased the deficit ridiculously, and we've dumped a ton of stimulus money into the system. And look where we are now. We're nowhere. It's debatable to say that we're back to square one. A lot of people would say we're worse off than we were at square one before we did all this. So it's obvious by that alone that this approach doesn't work. We also see with Japan, for example, which has been using quantitative easing for most of this past decade, and now that they're facing inflation after all their hard work on trying to avoid it. And you can see that in particular with the last vid that I just did with that clip from Bloomberg. So that's where we're at, and I hope that cleared it up for anybody that might not have known what the quantitative easing was. And my personal take on this whole thing, history shows us that the quantitative easing doesn't work and that we're basically screwed. Most of the economists out there are saying that inflation is unavoidable at this point, and that's what they're saying. But the banksters, they don't, from my view, the banksters don't want the system to collapse, because if it does, there goes their cash cow. The problem for us beeline players on the bench is that the people running the plays are also making the rules of the game. So these guys they're criminal, greedy, self-centered asshats, and who knows what trick they're gonna think up next to keep their pockets lined with our cash for as long as they can. That's it. Later, YouTube.